Okay, well, first of all, good morning. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting. Certainly, as you say, it wasn't long ago where Europe again was sort of the market no one really wanted to talk about or look at. It seemed like a long way behind economically and certainly in terms of vaccines. And as you say, we've come through very strongly. I mean, I think in the results we've seen recently was where we've had some very strong results in Europe. A lot of that has been, as always, from their operations outside of Europe. Most of the businesses, certainly the larger ones within the European markets, are global businesses that happen to be listed in Europe. So that's first of it. But I think as we look forward, momentum is building across Europe. Europe, as you said, has been late to many things. Fiscal support has been late. That's starting to come through now. Monetary support is still very strong. The ECB have made that very clear. Again, they see inflation as transitory. They're not going to change their policy anytime soon. So there's a lot of support for Europe, both fiscally and monetarily. And businesses are starting to do better. And Europe is now, having been a laggard, starting to open up. At the same time, Europe is clearly, as a market, much more attractively valued than many other areas, particularly the US. So, yeah, Europe actually looks like in a relatively good position at this point in time. We know there's still a lot of liquidity around that supports markets, and Europe looks to be like a pretty good place to be at this time.
Well, some of the sectors that have done best were the ones that were beaten down the most during the pandemic. And here I'm talking about financials, oil companies. Are those sectors that you want to have exposure to going into the second half of the year?
I mean, for us, it's always about the individual businesses rather than trying to pick sectors per se. I think it's certainly true, though, within the financials, there are a number of good businesses that are still looking attractively valued. And the interesting thing now, of course, is that we've been through a crisis period for the first time in a long time where the banks have come through it strongly. Yes, if we go back 12 months ago, they had big provision increases as they took provisions ahead of what they thought would be a very difficult time in the pandemic. And partly because of government support clearly around furlough schemes and lower rates, and partly because recovery has been more quickly than we'd anticipated. That's really not come to fruition. So we're seeing lots of write-backs to those provisions now, and we're seeing big profit beats partly as a result. But generally, they still come through, even with all that, in a very strong position. So they're actually supporting the economy. And in many cases, the banks are working with governments to help distribute finance to companies. So they certainly look interesting. I think it has to be a case-by-case basis. There are strong businesses. Oil, I think, is slightly different. It's an area we've always struggled with. We frankly just don't think these are very good businesses. At the moment, the oil price has seen a recovery, as we've seen over the last 12 months, and they are generating very strong cash flows at this point in time. At the moment, they're being very disciplined. They're not using that to reinvest back to oil, but they are using it to reinvest heavily into renewables. Clearly the right thing to do, but the long-term returns from the oil companies to that remains to be seen. So frankly, with the oil companies, we still just don't think they represent good long-term businesses. They don't generate consistent returns on capital or cash flow, albeit at the moment they look to be in a pretty strong place. So elements of financials, yes, we think are some good businesses. You have a private equity conversation coming out later. There's some listed plays in Europe that look very attractive and have done very, very well. So pick your stocks carefully, and there's good, attractive businesses out there.